Hey everybody, it's Brian Shannon from Alphatrends.net. Today is Saturday, the 29th of April, and here's our finishing numbers for the month. The S&P a little bit higher. The semiconductors got hit the hardest, down 6%. It's kind of surprising to me that the NASDAQ was still higher, even with the semis down that much. Biotechs had a good month, so let's take a look at the charts and make some sense of it. The S&P 500, we are still kind of battling with the anchored VWAP from the all-time high here on this daily time frame, still holding above the year-to-date and from this low. I kind of thought earlier in the week that we were going to continue to pull back down to this level, but obviously we had some earnings come in, and that gave it a little bit of a green light to continue higher. Looking at the weekly time frame, it's really starting to look like maybe this could turn into something. I'm not willing to get super bullish though, because we've got still a lot of stocks that are failing on earnings, and it's possible that that scare you out, wear you out could still happen with maybe a rally up and then a pullback into the range. So I'd say just continue to take it on a stock by stock basis. The Nasdaq clearly much more bullish than the S&P 500. It's still battling with the anchored volume weighted average price from the all-time high, but we do have a higher high and this higher low with a rising 10, 20, 30, 40 week moving average. So this week we tested the 10-week moving average, and when we look at the anchored volume weighted average price levels, it's pretty impressive that, here's the year-to-date anchored volume weighted average price. We had another momentum shift from there, so at about this point we set our anchor. So at about this point we realized this was an important low, so we set the anchor there. On Tuesday we came down perfectly to it, and now we're bouncing again. So the way I think you want to look at that is that from this most recent low, that this is going to be a great place to measure from going forward. So next week, if we start to see pullbacks down even as far as that, well, it'll be near the rising 5-day moving average and those anchored volume weighted average price levels. So that's what to keep an eye on for into next week. The Russell 2000 continues to be the worst. Here is the year-to-date chart. Well, starting here is the beginning of the year. And you can see early in the year, the anchored volume weighted average price was the exact place that buyers were showing up for a little while. Then we saw the anchor from the peak kind of capture the upside activity, put a cap on it, and then when we broke down over here, another drive lower. And now from this point, we see that we're so far unable to get back even above that level. So we're really stuck in a bigger range realistically. Even if next week we get back up towards this level, I wouldn't expect a break of these two important anchored VWAPs that come together, because it will have expended too much energy getting there. So I think you're just best off leaving the Russell 2000 itself alone. Of course, there's always individual stocks where there's activity that are going to be great to trade. Semiconductors, it's going to be interesting to see if we find some supply up near 250 as we're getting this bounce. So the anchor off of that high could be a place that provides a little bit of supply. On the weekly time frame, you just can't argue with the pattern here. It's very clear. We had this high and then this low. We had a higher high, a higher low. We had a higher high again, and this is looking like maybe another higher low. So it's very constructive looking. This is a stage 2 uptrend, and we've got to just make sure that we're not buying at times when it's below a declining 5-day moving average. Or I think that what's likely, the best scenario in here would be for it to kind of consolidate and then build some energy to break beyond that VWAP and maybe go on to make another higher high on the daily time frame. The biotechs still having a lot of trouble here. Let's look at this cleaner chart. This is the year-to-date anchored volume weighted average price, and again, notice how initially it had provided support. It was a battleground, provided resistance, and then just 2 weeks ago we were skeptical of it because it was at that level. It pulled back and found buyers. If we anchor this right to the low, that was pretty much the exact, well, this was the day of the low right here. So you can see it touched it almost perfectly right there. That is why we use the anchored volume weighted average price. It measures the sentiment from that low. And you can see how the buyers have been showing up in that area. Now, what seems likely is if we can go up here and hammer away at that anchored VWAP from the peak, then perhaps we can break higher maybe later in the week next week if we have some earnings that will support it. Energy names, you've got to be impressed with this as well. Here's the low that we've seen in energy. The anchored volume weighted average price from that level came pretty damn close to it, and we found some buyers. Now we're back above the year-to-date anchored VWAP, so the strength in the financial stocks, energy stocks rather, is pretty impressive here, and perhaps this was a little bear trap that now we've sucked in the shorts, and it could continue to move higher from here. Maybe spend a little bit of time hammering away at this, and then another upward move in the energy. Back to the financials, this is actually very impressive because the year-to-date anchored volume weighted average price is the blue. The purple one right here, this is the day that Silicon Valley had their problems. That's where that waterfall decline began. And you can see we were held below that until about 2 weeks ago, it jumped above it. Well, once it got into this area, we knew this was an important low, so we set an anchor there. And look at where this market came down to on Wednesday. Absolutely perfect. Again, you can't make this stuff up. The resistance at this anchored volume weighted average price was tested and held as support here. Tested and held again, and it was further enhanced because it was the anchored VWAP from the low. And look at the action off of there from 30, we got a dollar rally, 3% in the financials off that. So if you're involved in the financials, that would now make for a great place to set your stop. Worst case stop is under that low. That's a great low to protect your position against. And this week, it seems likely that we'll go on to test the anchor from the beginning of the year. A couple other things. I was on the Compound and Friends with Josh Brown and Michael Batnick this week. Great time. That's on YouTube. Take a look at that. If you're viewing this on YouTube, it's called the Compound and Friends. So that was a nice hour and a half discussion I had with those guys. And looking to Bitcoin, we had pointed out last week this anchored volume weighted average price. So this was from the low that it made last year, and then as it rallied away from there, we knew that was a new momentum shift, so we put another anchor there, and we came very close to it, and that's where we got our bounce. And now we're once again hanging out, toying with the anchored volume weighted average price from the all-time high in Bitcoin. So hopefully you by now can clearly see the value of these anchored volume weighted average price levels. It's what I wrote about in my book. It's what I spoke about with Josh and Michael. So take a look at that and have a good weekend.